are you ready to go, Ian?
Yes, I'll just call up the presentation.
Whilst you're doing that, I'll just very briefly introduce you. Rees works for the MHRA. As I understand it, you've worked there for quite a long time. Recently, in particular, Ian's been working on a project developing the new medicines manufacturing framework for point of care products under the Medicines and Medical Devices Act. And that might be particularly relevant to our topic over the next couple of days. So it's a real pleasure to welcome you, Ian, and do take the floor.
No, thank you very much, and thank you for the welcome, and good to meet with you and Wendy again. It's been, I would say, a fruitful collaboration, and I think underpins a lot of what we need, which is translation. You know, it's great to do the academic development, but it actually needs to get right through to the patient, and there are many steps, one of which is MHRA or our equivalent in other countries, and then somebody to pay for it, somebody to take it up, you know, the NHS or military and so on. So I'll just touch briefly on all of those. This may sound a little bit grand, but one of the messages that when you develop regulation, it needs to be enabling. And so regulation comes in two levels. There's the law, the legislative bits, and then there's the guidance that interprets it. So the most familiar probably is GMP, but there's GCP, good pharmacovigilance practice, GDP, GLP, clinical trials, MA, you name it, there's guidance on all of that. But it's the legislation that's at the top level. And one of the messages that's coming out of this framework that's been in development, and thanks really to Kenny and Wendy's work and others as well, it's really helped inform and fill the picture in. You know, we see part of the picture at the regulator, but some of the newer thinking comes from engagement with others like Kenny and Wendy. One of the, and I'll talk a little bit more about the feedback that we've had so far, but one of the main things is that there needs to be appropriate quality, safety and efficacy. So if you're getting these yourself, you need to know it's safe, it's going to work, it's actually for you, not the person in the bed next door, and so on and so forth. And we're seeing a very broad range of manufacturing and supply options. And I got a little picture which will demonstrate that, I hope. And to the extent that we can, given Niels Bohr's caveat that prediction, especially about the future, is very difficult. The other thing is implementation. And so we need to work, it's a complicated system, not just the regulation, but medicines in general and all the supply issues. So when you're making changes to a complex system, you need to work with a lot of people, and not just in the UK, because the patients that will benefit in the UK are no different to patients internationally. So we're in discussion with US FDA, Health Canada, TGA in Australia, and so on, to, if not get an identical framework, but an equivalent framework, so they can reach patients right across the board. So where do we get the information from? As I mentioned, from people like Wendy and Kenny in academia, through Innovation Office inquiries that have come to us. We've got this rather clunky acronym there. You'll see RASM, the Regulatory Advice Service for Regenerative Medicines. That's specific for ATMP type products. We have scientific advice meetings, and we do horizon scanning. And so, you know, it's a truism that science keeps moving on. That creates new technologies, and some of those will create new commercial opportunities. The problem, of course, is that the regulatory framework, and particularly the legislative element, doesn't move. So it's a bit like tectonic plates, you know, it builds up a tension, and eventually you get an earthquake or a bit of a volcano, perhaps, so hopefully not too many, as things shift. So the more change there is, the more destructive the innovation and the change, the more change needs to go with that. And so in this case, where it's very disruptive, you need to change both the legislation and the guidance that underpins it. So I think Wendy put up a slide. There's a lot of attributes that come out of this, but they're principally the short shelf life of the product, either the starting material or the finished product, dictates that it has to be made somewhere, either right next to the patient or within the patient or somewhere nearby. That means then you need a large number of manufacturing sites. You have to manufacture on demand, and you're in very novel and a wide range of manufacturing locations. And these are the sort of things that the current legislation, it doesn't forbid, but it doesn't work for. So, for example, any single product is manufactured in perhaps somewhere between 1 and 5 sites globally, because you can scale up. Because here you can't, you've got to scale out. So we've got applications where we're looking at between 50 and 200 manufacturing sites in the UK alone. So a massive contrast. It also covers this wide range of dosage forms, from gases, blood and biological products, small molecule, and ATMPs. And some of them are close, some of them are at clinical trial, like the diabetic foot ulcer product, and some are actually in practice, but should we say not strictly in compliance with the law, but as it stands. But we take a pragmatic and maybe a Nelsonian view of that. So just to put that in pictorial form, so if you like, the standard model of manufacture is a centralized version, factory, big or small, usually with chimneys. I couldn't find a picture without chimneys. But as you start to move away, you've got modular, and you may have heard this morning about vaccine manufacturing through modular units in Africa. So these can go from one factory to another, or potentially to the proximity of a hospital, kind of equivalent really of mobile MRI units. As you move further away, you've got true mobile manufacture. And then as you go further again, you're really in the point of care, so on the ward, in the theatre, or in military field hospitals. Then you go one further again, and we've got applications for manufacturing. And so that's a big departure. And of course, going with that is quite a shift. Perhaps I just illustrate them here in the kind of systems that are geared to support the manufacturing. Clearly in a factory, it's 100% geared for manufacturing of one or a range of different products. And going with that is all the training, the equipment, the quality systems, and so on and so forth. As you get further away from that, that's less and less a feature. Until eventually it's almost vanishingly rare. And as Wendy was saying, you're now in situations where you don't have all the fully trained personnel, so you're going to have to rely on systems that are either simple or automated and so on. So this is the kind of shift as you go left to right. And of course, I've shown it there as distinct areas, but they're not. It's a spectrum of manufacturing and then control systems that go along with that. So slightly complicated picture. I tried to do it in less than 40 words, but I don't think I can. So the key concept is to have a control site. So this is in effect the site that takes responsibility for all the manufacturing, but doesn't have the manufacturing. So it brings on board new sites. It's got the pharmaceutical quality system, qualification, validation, training, QP audit, all of those adverse event reporting, everything you'd expect. And then what we're trying to do to stabilize the system is to we've come up with a point of care master file. Now, these concepts are not new. You have plasma master files, you have active substance master files, vaccine antigen master files, and so on. And what we've done is repurpose them to suit what we need here. So that would control, so it's a hub and spoke type model, and all the spokes are listed in the master file, and it'll have other things as well. So then to start off with, sites will, manufacturing companies will typically have a few sites, and they will have a fairly simple reporting system, which will grow in complexity and sophistication as the system requires and expands. So the go-to area, from my perspective, which is a GMP background, is the inspection of the control site. Is the control site under control, and is it keeping all the spokes under control? So we would then always inspect that site, and then as needed, then the actual sites of manufacture to verify control. As the system grows, then we've got examples of this now with products at clinical trials, increasing numbers of sites, and then we will do more inspections. Eventually, hopefully, they'll go through the clinical trials successfully, and then they'll apply for a marketing authorization, and they'll be doing pharmacovigilance and so on. So that's the gist of it, and then the numbers of sites increases. And say we've got one application which in the UK alone is between 50 and 200 sites. So we had a consultation, and many of you will have been involved either in the stakeholder meetings that preceded that or in the public consultation. And we had a lot of detail. In fact, my summary document runs to about 19 pages, and I'll have to summarize it even further because there's a public summary that we've got to publish very soon. As you might imagine, most of the respondents were in the UK, but a lot, although the number 20% is international, they represent big impact organizations. So these are the FPA, the European organization that covers pharmaceutical manufacturers, the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers, and so on. So they represent very big number of organizations, and each of those are large in their own respect. I was also pleasantly surprised to see a lot of big pharma companies responding directly as well. This is something of interest to them. So we're also then conducting an impact assessment, whether, this is an obligation under any legislative change. What will the impact be numerically, in terms of money and so on, and availability of products. So that's near completion as well. And then all that feeds into the legislative changes which we've started drafting. That'll be followed then by the guidance development. So I won't go through these in detail. There were 4 main questions. Do you agree that we need something specific for this? The answer was nearly 100% yes. Do you agree with the proposals that I've just shown on the picture on the previous slide? Yes, in general, absolutely. And then the scope. Do you think it should cover modular all the way through to home? Answer again, yes. And then a lot of detail about making sure that quality, safety, and efficacy, all the benefits to the patients from lack of travel that's in this country, but I'm sure there'll be other benefits in other more difficult areas that Wendy was mentioning. So where are we? So I mentioned the prior activities with the stakeholders and the Innovation Office inquiries. Then we had a series of workshops, which were distant, remote, because we were by that stage into the pandemic. And then we had the Medicines and Medical Devices Act. So this is the legislative power that gives MHRA and our equivalents on the veterinary side, the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, the power to make changes for veterinary drugs as well. I came in February, and then we did the proposal last March, and then the consultation August, September. So now we're near the finalizing the assessment, and we'll be very soon drafting a public report. We've started preparing the legal changes, and I guess the trick here is, when you say enabling, it's like saying proportionate or commensurate. What does that mean? In essence, in simple terms, it meaning to put as the least amount of change that's necessary to make a coherent framework. The least that you can not get away, but is needed in law, but then all the operational details to go into the guidance documents that underpin that. And so when we've made the legal changes, these would be statutory instruments that go through a parliamentary process, and we're obliged under the MMD Act that it's debated, all these changes, and there are about 12 of them, of which the point of care legislative framework is one. They have to be debated. It's called the affirmative process. This is something new to me. It has to be debated in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And then while that's happening, we'll be developing guidance. So that's roughly where we are, but the stakeholder engagements will continue all the way through. So thank you for your attention. Hope that hasn't gone too much over time.
Many thanks for
shut down the presentation and hand back to you.
Yep. Now, thank you very much, Jan. I think actually the key thing for this community in terms of the quick takeaway is actually as we've been developing point of care ideas and starting to put things together, there's never necessarily been a clear path towards regulation of them. And so the really positive thing from our perspective is that there is now starting to develop, and that's starting to bring things through. So thank you very much for sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
The initial session was going to be on sort of regulation and requirements. And so the first of those we saw from Rees from the MHRA before he had to leave. And that was kind of setting the scene for us in terms of explaining what's happening in the UK, at least, in terms of how the regulatory structure is evolving to support distributed manufacturing in healthcare, and what the kind of structure of that might look like in terms of what we have to do with our design information and our manufacturing information in order to deliver products at point of care in a sort of redistributed way. So Jan set the scene to that extent. The next presentation kind of builds on that a little bit, but comes at it from other direction, really thinking about requirements. And so it's by Andrew Lamb from Field Ready, who's going to talk about additive manufacturing disaster relief. For those of you who don't know, Field Ready is a humanitarian organisation that's pioneered the application of manufacturing, of local manufacturing in disaster responses. Andrew, I assume you're ready and you have some slides to share. You're very welcome.